In a previous video, the process of the Earth's expansion as a result of the weapon used on ancient Dwarka was discussed. It may be that the truth is too unbelievable to be believed, yet true enough to be known. If the events described are generally true, we can find evidence in the data and specific details. As was discussed, the evidence appears to suggest that the single landmass of the Earth fractured along the Mediterranean between North America and Africa, then North America and South America, to explosively erupt in the Pacific Ocean. We can more closely examine evidence to determine if it is further supported. Notably, even if the line of reasoning encounters anomalies, it does not preclude the anomalies from shedding more light onto the subtle nuances of the process, as was once described by Richard Feynman.
A lot of other things became quite clear. Why the Earth is round, because everything gets pulled in. And why it isn't round, because it's spinning so that the outside gets thrown out a little bit and it balances. And why the sun and moon are round, and so on. Now, as the science developed and measurements were made ever more accurately, the tests of Newton's law became much more stringent. And the first careful tests involved the moons of Jupiter. By careful observations of the way they went around over a long period of time, one could be very careful to check that everything was according to Newton. And turned out not to be the case. The moons of Jupiter appeared to be first get sometimes to 8 minutes ahead of time and sometimes 8 minutes behind schedule, where schedule is the calculated values according to Newton's laws. It was noticed that they were ahead of schedule when they were close, when Jupiter was close to the Earth, and behind schedule when it was far away, a rather odd circumstance. And Mr. Römer, having confidence in the law of gravitation, came to an interesting conclusion, that it takes light some time to travel from the moons to the Earth, and that what we're looking at when we see the moons are not how they are now, but how they were the time ago that it took the light to get here. Now, when Jupiter's near us, it takes less time for the light to come, and when Jupiter's further, it takes longer time, so he had to correct the observations for the differences in time, and by the fact that they were this much too early or that much too late, was able to determine the velocity of light. This was the first demonstration that light was not an instantaneously propagating material. I bring this particular matter to your attention because it illustrates something. That when a law is right, it can be used to find another one. That by having confidence in this law, if something is the matter, it suggests perhaps some other phenomenon. And if we had not known the law of gravitation, we would have taken much longer to find the speed of light, because we would not have known what to expect of Jupiter's satellites. This process has developed into an avalanche of discoveries. Each new discovery permits the tools for much more discovery, and this is the beginning of that avalanche, which has gone on now for 400 years in a continuous process, and we're still avalanching along at high speed at this time.
This description of the process of Earth's expansion as a result of a vortex weapon attack on ancient Dwarka is based on holding the same confidence in Newton's laws, where modern interpretations of physics rely on three separate models which lean on one another as support. The universe is just that, the universe. It does not adhere to three separate natures when it is itself one, where classical mechanics captures the simple truth of physics, and it was only a matter of deducing what nuances, such as the speed of light, we were not accounting for. If we find anomalies, they can instead give more details to how exactly the whole of the process occurred. The oceanic crust itself largely matches the proposed process, but other particulars can be considered. Here are systems discussed in the process and their proposed scientific ages. Notably, all dates are only encapsulating the period of time back in Earth's geological history until the beginning of the Phanerozoic. It could be that the dates did not align whatsoever. Importantly, models of Earth using modern plate tectonics infer motions of bodies that would have been necessary to induce certain mountain ranges. If the Earth expanded, these motions are likely artifacts of models describing orogeny according to plate tectonics. The expanding Earth model does not require these mechanisms because rapid transition of Earth between states can induce substantial crust deformation. If we look closely, it is worth being aware that plates do tend to be conveniently shaped in plate tectonics. The Himalayas, which visually appear as if they were formed in the same process as the further east Jaijin Mountains, are each given their own separate subducting plate to explain their uprise. Yet colliding waves provide an explanation without need of a new plate to explain the other segment of the mountain chain. Microplates are also used to describe regions such as the Scotia Arc, yet a propagating wave from explosive force causing the Pacific Ocean to be created would physically make the shape without any need of introducing microplates. Thus, it is most likely that the period describing what occurred during the process of the Earth's expansion is within the Phanerozoic period as a whole, with the event itself occurring at something that appears relatively as near the beginning of the eon, a period in which geological time was likely passing in a manner similar to today, having rates of radioactive decay similar to those which we measure presently until the event. While the dates used to describe the time scale are of the magnitude of millions of years, global flood stories, narratives passed down from our ancestors who lived at the time, describe the process as occurring on the scale of a singular year. As a result, if this is indeed what occurred, and rapid radioactive decay due to the Earth itself radioactively decaying painted a picture of millions of years passing, then we can expect some degree of discrepancy and subtlety in the data. With these things in mind, many of the dates do generally align well with the sequence of events. While the Mediterranean Sea is younger than the Appalachian Mountains, this could be explained by a delay in the release of material physically exiting the Earth relative to the moment the propagating energy passed the location. The largest anomaly by far is that of the Alps, considered a mere 65 million years old, relative to the seemingly 300 million years age of the fracture. And yet, this itself does align quite well with the age of the Deccan Traps and Chicxulub. Importantly, lower crust intrusions have been found that are older than the Alps and have nothing to do with their formation, radiometrically dating to 320 million years, as well as younger felsic intrusions dated to both the Permian and Triassic periods. Thus, the Alps themselves overwrote the less pronounced structures formed at similar times to the Appalachian Mountains, as well as in 3 separate orogenies. Alpine-type mountains formed by continental collisions are named after the Alps. This is because the Alps are considered to be caused by the collision of 2 continents. Thus, while the anomaly to the model existed unexplained, it can still reasonably be described by subsequent forces applied into Africa, especially around the time of the internal impact on the crust causing the Chicxulub crater. It is important to note, given the recognizable absurdity of the claims, that distinct alignments do not have to occur between data and theory. From a plate tectonic perspective, the simultaneous occurrence of each is coincidental. However, in the case of the present model, details do align. When Europe and Africa began to move apart, they were caused to move back together when Africa began moving northeast at around 100 million years ago, considered to be due to the formation of the Atlantic Ocean, though this could also be due to the sudden force being applied into South America from the planet rupturing and through it into Africa, which was adjacent. The first continental collision took place in the late Cretaceous around 66 million years ago. Another variation is between the significantly lower age of the Deccan Traps and Chicxulub in comparison to the eruption of the Western Pacific Ocean. Importantly, the storm itself could have allowed for currents through the planet prior to any signs it left behind on local terrain. The Deccan Traps could be a culmination of a rapidly growing vortex that only upon reaching sufficient energy discharged subtle particles of relatively negative energy into the Earth and through it in a sufficient quantity so as to induce a counter positive upwelling of the material of the Deccan Traps. This discharge then could have passed through the Earth and brought macroscopic material with it to such a high degree as to induce the Chicxulub impact. While the fracturing of the Earth across half of its circumference would have drastically weakened its structural integrity, it is possible that Australia began to be pushed away from the region between North America and Asia, with new oceanic crust erupting into the region prior to the Deccan Traps and Chicxulub events occurring. As previously discussed, Australia and Antarctica are among the tail end of the spiral formation of the Earth's crust prior to expansion. The boundary naturally formed in the region may have been susceptible enough to allow for the energy to immediately divert to below Australia in a manner so as to create the Western Pacific.